I will try to do something that is a very commodity every once in a while with speakers. I will try to stick with the topic. And I will also try to do something that is keeping you slightly entertained and keep you from falling asleep. And I really hope I manage that, otherwise please snore silently and let me talk a little bit about troubled times in a divided world. And if you look around the world, indeed, times seem to be troubled. You see more and more cracks all around the world, and the world seems more divided than ever. And it's not the old East versus West anymore, even though it has kind of a revival at the moment. But we have a multifaceted dimensions of a divide, meaning we have the West versus the Islamic world, we have the Asian divide, we have the US, who is getting a bit crazy at the moment with North Korea, and also with trade. We have the UK with the Brexit, we have the populace all around Europe, be it Poland, being Hungary. We have Russia that tries to be an empire again, thereby setting the world a bit on fire. We have Turkey that is absolutely going crazy at the moment as well. And we have the Arab Spring that slightly turned into winter over time. And you also have the European Union that seems ever more divided. And this is mainly because it has built on wishful thinking. It has been built as a good weather project, and as soon as it starts raining, it's seen that the roof is actually a bit leaking. And you have seen all the external shocks. You have seen the economic and financial crisis, you have the Ukraine crisis, you have the migration crisis, you have now Turkey, and you have the internal shocks, being the Greek crisis, now having the Brexit. And you have the permanent tensions all the time in the European Union, meaning politicians have been doing what they've been doing for quite a while, meaning they have been using Europe or the EU as a scapegoat for domestic issues. And there we have an unholy alliance, I would say, of three factors. That means human nature, politics, and increased information. And talking about human nature, blaming others, being it opposition, foreigners, EU, is actually something very common. Just remember some years back when you were younger, smaller, and if you're breaking something, whose fault was it? Certainly not yours. It was your little brother, your little sister, the neighbor, your imaginary friend. Somebody else did it, because it's easier to blame others. But now we are at a point where we need a bit of realism, and we need to say what we actually want with Europe. So far, there have been a lot of voices, but there has been no plan. There was a lot of integration happening without answering the basic question: where are we going with this? And now there's a white paper. There has been the Declaration of Rome 60 years after the Summit of Rome. The Declaration of Rome has been signed. That is somewhere 5 different options between carrying on like that, or multi-speed Europe, or more integration. And the discussion is actually very much overdue, as we de facto have a multi-level Europe. We have the Eurozone, we have the Schengen zone, we have the CVM countries, and we even have the Eastern Partnership countries. So if we finally answer the question where we want to go with this, the answer how we shape the entire thing becomes a lot easier. But it requires 2 things, and that is willingness and acceptance. Willingness on the level of politicians to actually define and integrate and actually also communicate this. Expectations that are needed, explanations are needed, so that the people are actually able to understand and accept that things are changing. And things have ever been changing. The world is changing on a daily basis. It has ever been doing that. And people need to accept that, and politicians tend to do something that's, again, very human, saying, we will take care of it, everything will stay the same, you will have stability. But it's easier to blame others than actually do something. And I come from a country, Germany, where we are a proud country of 82 million football coaches. And I think Montenegro, or the UK, has some similarities in that. We all know better what should be done. And so no wonder that people asked, what has the European Union ever done for us? And I don't want to use the peace argument that Richard mentioned earlier, that is quite obsolete. But the European Union has expanded personal and economic freedom across national borders. It has made the economic zone bigger. It has enabled growth by trade. And I'm not even mentioning the direct transfers from the European Union to emerging and developing members. And despite all these advantages that should be quite obvious, people feel disenfranchised with the European Union. It's seen as an elitist project where the guys up there decide what happens to the little guy down there. And there is a general tendency, the more distant an institution becomes from people, the more abstract it becomes, the less people can actually relate to it, the easier it becomes to actually blame that kind of institution. And as I mentioned before, the European Union in Western countries was seen as a necessity for trade, for peace, for integration, whatever. Especially in the new member countries, it was more seen as an idea, something that the countries wanted to join, be it because part of something progressing, or as Russia has been mentioned, being protected. And in a lot of places, the EU could actually not deliver on that kind of over-expectations. But that is, again, the fault of the member states. I'm sorry to say that. And it's the fault of the respective governments. They lead in dishonest debate. They hinder initiatives on a European level and the implementation of proper reforms on the national level. And I live in Bulgaria for the last 5 years. I can tell you a thing or two about hindering reforms. And that makes it very easy for populists. They take an actual or perceived problem and use it for their own gains. They play the Messiah. They tell people, you don't need to change. We will take care of you for that. And they reinforce this feeling of we versus them. And people want to punish the elite and take away their toys, meaning the European Union. That was quite obvious, actually, in the Dutch and French elections for the EU constitution in 2005. And that is something also that was seen with the Brexit. So this surprising blindness hints to a fundamental problem that is not new, but more perceived now, the gap between the people and the elites. That was extensively discussed after Brexit and Trump. And indeed, if you look at the 93% in Washington, D.C. that voted for Hillary Clinton, and the absolute inability of political scientists to predict the electoral result of Mr. Trump, you see that there is an actual problem. And they have been so arrogant about that. And they have not been seeing the rhetoric against free trade, foreign investment, migration that has grown stronger. And you could see the celebrations in Europe after Mr. Trump has won. But you see also something else that is uniting the left and the right forces. It's the Anti-Globalization Alliance and their fight against open societies. And Mr. Dahrendorf, the great German philosopher and former chairman of my foundation, actually described it even in 1997, where he said, globalization offers the big chance or the big opportunity to lift people millions out of poverty. But it also has a danger in it, meaning there might be a new regionalism that people seek to retreat to. They seek to retreat to ever more closed environments out of fear of this increased complexity of the world. And they might retreat to nation states, communities, or religious communities. And to battle this, Dahrendorf says, we need conflict, because conflict is a basic fact of social life, just as conflict may even be an essential part of life itself. That means we must engage with the illusional expectation of progress and abstract greatness that will ultimately lead to disaster. But instead of facing populists in arguments, mainstream often resorts to demonizing and thereby A, validating the others, and B, making them more attractive as a non-establishment alternative. Trump is an idiot, his supporters are all Nazis, the views they hold are ridiculous, and they're only worth being ridiculed. Instead of going into discussion, especially the political left has redefined reality via language. So they have the perceived moral high ground. And that is not matching the perceived reality of most people and makes it easy game for populists and conspiracy theorists. Especially as they have been doing one thing very well, and I'm coming to a close, they have been using a language that people are actually able to understand. And this falls on fertile ground. Look at polls from any country, people think that its life is getting worse. Look, that's just not true. We see worldwide, with some local exceptions, an unprecedented standard of living, life expectancy, health, wealth, and education. In the last 50 years, poverty has fallen more than in the last 500. Still, sorry to say that, some 71% of Brits think it is getting worse. Only 5% think it's improving. Ask whether global poverty has fallen by half, doubled, or remained the same in the last 20 years, only 5% Americans are able to give the right answer. Even if you give a chimpanzee the choice between three things, it is more likely to have the right answer than the Americans that were asked. Why is that so? We are told that the world has never been worse. There's climate change, war, terrorism, you name it, and it's accompanied by a social industry that's selling bad news. There's gender pay gap, poverty, and this is mainly alternative facts. These are shadow debates that actually prevent real debates. The world is not getting worse, it's getting more complex. Information is getting faster, and people have to make sense of it. Mankind has made more progress in the last 100 years than in the last 100,000. So, and if you look at the media, you see a very interesting tendency there. They are involuntarily accelerating that effect because bad news sell better than good news. Nobody gives a damn about the 40 million planes that land safely each year. It's the one that doesn't land safely that makes the headlines. And that is also, talking about Russia, used for propaganda. And this pessimism has consequences, political consequences. People who are voters who think they were better off in the past are more likely to turn to a government that wants to turn back the clock. 81% of Donald Trump supporters that think that life has gone worse in the last 50 years. 61% of the Brits think that their children have it worse off. So just one closing word and then I will really finish. We can actually battle that, and that is by engaging in discussion, meaning we need to stand something for anything. We need to engage in debates, because as we've seen in the Dutch elections, these so-called populists don't have a chance in that. And unfortunately, I have to say, Brexit was not an argument for a leaner union, for more trade, for a reform of the European Union. It was a campaign led by nationalists with a protectionist agenda, and they have been just simply lying to people. But indeed, there might be something good in the end, and that is that we finally lead the discussion where we want to go with Europe, where we want to go with the European Union. That politicians might actually finally get to the conclusion that they cannot talk about people, but they have to talk to the people.
Thank you so much.